It began with a whisper in the hangars of the U.S. Navy, a whisper that would grow into a storm of disbelief and awe. The story of a plane so intricately designed, so improbably over-engineered that every mechanic, every pilot, every strategist who encountered it could scarcely believe its existence. And yet, in the chaos of the Pacific War, it became the silent predator that turned the tide of torpedo attacks with an efficiency no one had imagined. For this was the tale of the torpedo bomber that defied expectations, a marvel of engineering and audacity conceived by a designer whose obsession with perfection seemed almost pathological, whose insistence on complexity over simplicity, redundancy over elegance, and raw firepower over convenience birthed an aircraft that could survive hits that would cripple any conventional bomber, that could deliver its payload with surgical precision under fire, that could make pilots who had flown every model from the modest Douglas TBD to the sleek Curtiss SB-2C wonder if they had stepped into a dream, a nightmare, or history itself. For from the first sketches drawn in dimly lit offices to the clattering assembly lines where dozens of artisans fitted thousands of individual parts together by hand, every nut, bolt, gear, and rivet was a testament to a vision that saw warfare not as a series of compromises, but as a canvas for mechanical genius, where each calculated risk, each added pound, each unconventional system was justified by the promise of dominance over enemy fleets. The promise that when this machine took off from a carrier deck, it was not merely a plane but a statement, a declaration that American ingenuity, obsessive precision, and daring could outmatch any Axis adversary. A statement that would be written in the torpedo tracks across enemy hulls, in the stunned reports of Japanese sailors who could not understand why a slow, ungainly bomber was systematically dismantling their formations. A statement that began in the mind of a single designer who refused to accept limitations imposed by cost, weight, or bureaucratic skepticism, who spent nights drafting, recalculating, and arguing with engineers and admirals alike over the merits of every component, insisting that if a plane could carry more, withstand more, hit harder, and survive longer, it must. And thus the aircraft emerged not as a compromise of practicality, but as a testament to what happens when obsession meets vision. And when pilots first took control of the aircraft, they found that its handling was unlike anything they had flown, at once sluggish in turns yet astonishingly steady in a dive, resilient under anti-aircraft fire and precise in torpedo deployment, its twin engines a symphony of power and reliability, its fuselage a fortress of aluminum and ingenuity. Every system interlocked with redundancies that seemed almost paranoid, yet became life-saving. For in missions where standard bombers would falter, crash, or miss entirely, this aircraft completed every objective with alarming consistency, and as word spread through squadrons, the stories became legend. How it could fly low through intense flak, how it could return crippled yet intact, how a pilot could focus on the target without fearing that a single engine failure or minor structural flaw would doom the mission. And these tales fed into a growing mystique, a narrative that combined awe of the machine with reverence for the daring aviators who mastered it, for they became knights of the Pacific skies, wielding a tool whose lethality was matched only by the precision of its construction, whose over-engineered systems turned perceived flaws into tactical advantages, whose presence forced enemy captains to rethink naval strategy, to fear the shadows beneath the clouds where this bomber prowled, unseen until it struck. And yet, behind the stories and the glory lay countless debates, countless engineering sleepless nights, countless adjustments to ensure that the aircraft would achieve its unprecedented kill ratio. For every additional turret, every reinforced bulkhead, every intricate linkage in the control surfaces had been scrutinized, simulated, and tested in the belief that perfection was not just desirable but necessary. And as pilots recounted missions where torpedoes found their mark with uncanny regularity, where aircraft carriers and cruisers were left crippled, where Japanese naval doctrine was challenged in ways unforeseen, it became clear that this over-engineered marvel was not over-engineered at all, but purpose-built for domination, a manifestation of human ingenuity elevated to combat effectiveness. And as the Pacific War raged on, the bomber became an icon, whispered about in intelligence reports, studied in tactical manuals, and celebrated in quiet corners of the Navy as the aircraft that could do what no one else could. The instrument by which a designer's obsession translated directly into victory, and yet even in triumph there remained a tension, a suspense. For every mission was a gamble, every engagement a test of whether the complex systems could withstand reality, whether the pilots could harness the full potential of the machine, and as each sortie concluded, the answer was written not in paper or blueprints, but in wreckage left behind, in the amazed accounts of survivors, in the statistics that revealed a kill ratio unmatched by any other plane in American service. And it was this combination of daring design, relentless engineering, and audacious piloting that cemented the aircraft's place in history. An aircraft that, despite skepticism, despite the apparent madness of its complexity, achieved feats that redefined what a torpedo bomber could accomplish. And as we look back now, the story is more than just metal and engines. It is about vision, obsession, and the extraordinary results when both meet the crucible of war. And as the camera of history pans over the decks, the hangars, the battlefields, one cannot help but feel the pulse of suspense, the echo of engines roaring, the silent, inevitable approach of a bomber that seemed almost alive, almost sentient in its lethality, reminding us that sometimes overengineering is not a flaw but a weapon, a carefully calculated instrument of domination whose impact would echo far beyond the Pacific skies and whose legend, born in the minds of one obsessive designer, would continue to inspire awe, analysis, and storytelling for generations. And as this point draws to its suspenseful close, we are left with the tantalizing question of how exactly this bomber achieved such unmatched precision and lethality, a mystery only unraveled in the next chapters of its incredible journey. As the bomber rolled off the assembly line, each unit a labyrinth of carefully calculated engineering choices, it became evident that the genius of its designer was matched only by the audacity of the pilots who would fly it. For every panel, every hydraulic line, every torpedo mount had been scrutinized to the point of obsession, and yet, despite its complexity, the aircraft's systems operated in a harmony that belied the countless hours of trial and error, the heated debates in design rooms, the sleepless nights of engineers measuring tolerances down to fractions of a millimeter. And when the first pilots took to the skies, the sensation was electrifying. The engines hummed with power. The fuselage vibrated with controlled energy. The controls responded with a precision that seemed impossible for such a heavily armed machine. And as the bomber climbed into the early morning light over the Pacific, the rising sun glinting off the meticulously riveted aluminum skin, it was clear that this plane was not merely a tool of war, but a marvel of human ingenuity. A flying testament to the idea that obsession, when channeled into design, could produce results that defied logic and convention. And as training sorties became real combat missions, reports began to filter back from the front lines describing encounters that seemed almost surreal. How the bomber could approach enemy formations under heavy anti-aircraft fire with the sort of precision usually reserved for simulators. How gunners could lay down suppressing fire while the pilot executed complex maneuvers with uncanny stability. How torpedoes released from its bomb bays consistently found their targets even in choppy seas and under evasive enemy tactics. And these accounts, initially dismissed as exaggeration, were confirmed again and again as intelligence officers compiled kill ratios and operational success rates that far exceeded anything previously documented. A testament not only to pilot skill but to the sheer mechanical superiority of the design, and yet the brilliance of the aircraft lay not only in its offensive capabilities, but in the way it absorbed punishment. For while conventional bombers would falter under the first burst of flak or the first collision with turbulent air, this machine seemed to shrug off damage, its multiple redundant systems kicking in seamlessly, engines running even when a cylinder failed, hydraulics rerouted when lines were severed, structural reinforcements holding wings and fuselage together when other aircraft would have torn apart. And as squadron leaders studied mission reports, they began to understand that what they had in their hands was more than a bomber. It was a force multiplier, a flying fortress capable of rewriting the rules of aerial warfare. And this understanding infused the pilots with a mix of confidence and awe, knowing that every sortie would test their courage, their skill, and their ability to exploit the machine's extraordinary capabilities, for in every mission there was an unspoken tension. The suspense of whether the bomber's complex systems would hold up under the firestorm of combat, whether its over-engineered intricacies would be an asset or a liability, and as they penetrated enemy defenses, dodging fighters and anti-aircraft artillery, each successful strike reinforced the legend, spreading tales of the aircraft's near-miraculous survivability, its uncanny accuracy, its ability to deliver devastating torpedo attacks where simpler designs would fail, and the mystique grew, becoming a symbol not only of technological mastery, but of the daring, meticulous, almost obsessive mindset that birthed it. For behind every curve of the fuselage, behind every redundant control system, behind every overbuilt engine component was the indelible mark of a designer unwilling to accept compromise, who believed that the path to victory lay in perfection, and in this relentless pursuit, a machine was created that would challenge conventional military wisdom, that would force enemy strategists to reconsider the vulnerabilities of their fleets, that would turn seemingly impossible engagements into consistent victories. And as historians would later note, the aircraft's influence extended beyond immediate combat results, inspiring generations of engineers, designers, and pilots, demonstrating that the combination of creativity, obsession, and unyielding standards could produce outcomes that were not just superior but revolutionary. And yet, even in these triumphs, there remained the ever-present undercurrent of suspense. For each mission demanded that pilots master not just the skies, but the very complexities of the aircraft itself. To internalize every system, anticipate every reaction, and navigate scenarios where split-second decisions could exploit its design brilliance or expose it to unforeseen hazards. And as the bomber carved a deadly path through the Pacific theater, the narratives multiplied, pilots recounting low-level approaches that skirted the horizon to avoid radar, evasive maneuvers that exploited the plane's unique aerodynamic stability, torpedo attacks executed with surgical precision, and returns to carriers under duress where engines sputtered but the airframe held, reinforcing a growing mythos that this over-engineered machine was not just a bomber but a legend, a confluence of human genius and mechanical perfection that existed only because someone refused to accept the limitations imposed by conventional thinking. And as each engagement concluded, and each pilot recounted another miraculous survival, the suspense built, not merely in the stories themselves, but in the knowledge that the bomber's full capabilities were still being explored, that even after dozens of missions, no one had yet fully exhausted its potential. And in this space between observed performance and untapped possibility lay the tension, the hook that kept crews, commanders, and later audiences riveted. For this was a story of calculated audacity, of obsessive engineering, of pilots dancing on the knife edge of danger with a machine that seemed to anticipate every threat. And as the sun set over the endless blue of the Pacific, casting shadows on decks, waves, and distant islands, the bomber returned, engines humming, fuselage battered yet intact, leaving behind not just the wreckage of enemy vessels, but a legend that would grow with every recounting. A story of how one designer's refusal to compromise created a weapon that transcended ordinary limitations. And as the echoes of gunfire faded into memory, the anticipation lingered. The suspense that the next mission would test the limits again, that the bomber's true genius was still being discovered, and that every sortie carried the promise of awe, triumph, and the inexorable demonstration that over-engineering obsession and human daring combined could achieve feats previously deemed impossible. As the bomber continued to etch its reputation across the Pacific theater, the pilots who had mastered its demanding systems began to realize that every aspect of the aircraft was a carefully orchestrated symphony of engineering decisions. From the way the torpedo release mechanism synchronized with airspeed and altitude to ensure an almost unerring strike, to the shock-absorbing landing gear that allowed carrier landings in turbulent seas, to the baffling array of backup systems that could reroute hydraulics, electrical power, and fuel flow in real time. Each redundancy designed to ensure that the aircraft would survive the chaos of battle. And as more pilots flew combat sorties, the learning curve, though steep, became a testament to human adaptability, for the machine demanded absolute attention. requiring the aviator to internalize dozens of interacting systems simultaneously, to anticipate failure modes, to understand how an engine misfire in the left nacelle could affect torque and yaw, to feel how a minor shift in weight distribution could alter the flight envelope. And those who succeeded were transformed, not just into competent pilots, but into virtuosos capable of leveraging the aircraft's design to devastating effect, executing maneuvers that seemed impossible in other bombers, striking with surgical precision while surviving scenarios that would have destroyed lesser machines. And as word of these feats reached Naval Command, operational doctrines began to evolve. For the bomber was not merely a participant in engagements, but a disruptive force that challenged existing tactics, forcing planners to rethink formations, interception strategies, and defensive coverage. And as intelligence reports documented the repeated success of torpedo attacks, detailing the meticulous destruction of enemy ships in coordinated strikes, the significance of the aircraft's engineering became even clearer, not as a collection of parts, but as a holistic system whose over-engineered complexity translated directly into strategic advantage. And yet, despite these remarkable outcomes, each mission carried the ever-present tension of unknowns. The suspense of whether the aircraft would perform flawlessly, whether the pilots could execute the intricate procedures required under fire, whether enemy forces would exploit vulnerabilities that the designers had anticipated but could never fully eliminate. And in this delicate balance of risk and reward, the true genius of the design revealed itself. For every redundancy, every reinforced bulkhead, every extra pound of armor was not superfluous, but a calculated insurance policy against the unpredictable hazards of combat, ensuring that even when chaos reigned, the bomber would emerge from engagements intact. Its mission accomplished, and as pilots recounted narrow escapes, tales of enemy fire striking fuselage, yet failing to compromise critical systems, of torpedoes released under extreme conditions hitting targets dead center, and of formation maneuvers that leveraged the aircraft's unique handling to evade fighters. The legend grew, a legend not of myth, but of reproducible performance verified through countless sorties. And this narrative of reliability and lethality began to take hold not just in official reports, but in the culture of the squadrons themselves, in the confidence that crews felt stepping onto the deck, knowing that their machine was a marvel capable of surviving what would have been certain disaster. And as the bomber continued to operate under extreme conditions, from dawn strikes against heavily defended harbors to night missions that demanded stealth and precision, it became clear that the over-engineering was not merely an indulgence, but a necessity. For the Pacific theater was unforgiving, with weather, enemy defenses, and the sheer scale of operations testing both pilots and machines to the limits. And yet, with each successful mission, the aircraft's reputation solidified, its kill ratio proving again and again that meticulous design and obsessive attention to detail could translate directly into battlefield superiority. And as the story of its exploits circulated, it inspired not only fear among adversaries but also a profound respect among allies, who marveled at the ingenuity, daring, and precision required to harness its potential. For this bomber demanded more than basic piloting skill. It demanded mastery, focus, and the ability to think several steps ahead, to anticipate not only the aircraft's behavior, but the movements and tactics of the enemy. And in these moments of extreme stress, the aircraft's over-engineered systems provided a margin of safety that allowed human skill to shine, transforming ordinary pilots into legends. And yet, this transformation was not instantaneous, for the learning curve was steep, the complexity daunting, and each sortie required vigilance, adaptability, and unwavering concentration, making the suspense palpable not only for those in the cockpit, but for those observing from the deck or the command center. For every mission carried with it the possibility of failure or triumph, and the outcomes repeatedly confirmed the genius of the design, reinforcing the narrative that the bomber's intricacies were not impediments, but assets, its over-engineering not an excess, but a carefully considered necessity. And as analysts later reviewed engagement data comparing kill ratios, survivability, and mission success rates across dozens of aircraft types, the numbers were staggering, revealing a machine whose performance exceeded expectations, defied conventional wisdom, and created a new benchmark for aerial warfare. And in this interplay of design, piloting skill, and operational strategy lay a deeper story, one of human ingenuity, obsession, and daring. For the aircraft's success was not solely mechanical but also cultural, instilling in pilots, engineers, and commanders alike a confidence in precision, resilience, and audacity. A confidence that allowed them to undertake missions others would not attempt, to push the limits of aircraft and human capability simultaneously. And as the bomber continued to dominate in its operational niche, the suspense remained, for every sortie was a test. Every mission an opportunity to discover the next hidden strength or limitation. And as the waves of the Pacific rolled beneath the aircraft, as flak exploded in bursts around it, as enemy fighters swarmed in coordinated attacks, the machine responded with reliability, precision, and resilience, reinforcing a legacy that would echo through history. A story of over-engineering turned into advantage, of obsession turned into victory, and as the first half of its journey reached a crescendo, the anticipation for the next phase of the story, the further refinement of tactics, the escalation of engagements, and the ultimate demonstration of its unmatched kill ratio hung in the air like a charged current, a suspenseful prelude to the continuing saga of America's most formidable torpedo bomber, whose legend was still being written in the skies, in the decks of carriers, and in the stunned reactions of the enemy who could not comprehend how such a complex, improbable machine could achieve so much, leaving audiences, historians, and future engineers alike captivated, inspired, and eager to witness the next chapter in a story defined by daring, genius, and unrelenting precision. As the bomber's reputation spread across fleets and squadrons, its influence extended far beyond individual missions, shaping strategic planning, training regimens, and even the very mindset of pilots who would come to fly it, for the aircraft demanded an understanding of aerial warfare that transcended rote procedure, requiring anticipation, adaptation, and a near-intuitive grasp of complex systems that reacted dynamically to every input, environmental condition, and enemy maneuver. And in the early days of deployment, instructors reported that cadets who struggled with simpler aircraft often thrived when challenged by the bomber's intricate controls. Forced to engage in multi-layered problem-solving under pressure, their minds and reflexes honed to operate in a realm where milliseconds determined whether a torpedo found its mark or a formation survived a coordinated attack. And yet, even as pilots adapted, the bomber's over-engineering remained both awe-inspiring and intimidating, with every panel, linkage, and redundant system representing both an opportunity and a potential pitfall if mishandled. For while failure rates were low, the consequences of mismanaging a complex sequence could be catastrophic, and the tension of this duality, immense power paired with exacting operational demands, added a layer of psychological suspense to every mission, a mental challenge as rigorous as the physical dangers of combat. And as these dynamics played out in real-world engagements, the bomber proved to be more than just a platform. It became a school of mastery, teaching pilots lessons in precision, risk management, and the exploitation of mechanical advantage. And as aircrews recounted their experiences, the tales became increasingly vivid, describing low-altitude runs through anti-aircraft fire that tested both nerves and skill, coordinated strikes against moving targets in seas rough enough to challenge navigation, and evasive maneuvers executed with a grace and stability that seemed impossible for an aircraft of such size and payload. And as the kill ratio climbed, the narrative of the bomber evolved into legend, not just because of the raw numbers, but because of the qualitative difference it made in engagements, reshaping enemy expectations, altering defensive doctrines, and forcing a recalibration of what was considered survivable in aerial attack. And this influence extended to intelligence analysis, where reports of improbable survivals and precise torpedo hits prompted both fear and respect, generating a mystique that enhanced the psychological impact of its presence even before weapons were deployed. For opponents who knew the aircraft could appear anywhere along the horizon, strike with deadly accuracy, and survive conditions that would destroy lesser planes, carried the weight of uncertainty, and in warfare, uncertainty is a weapon, amplifying the bomber's operational effect beyond its physical actions. And as the Pacific theater intensified, with fleets maneuvering across vast distances and engagements escalating in scale and complexity, the bomber's capabilities became indispensable, its over-engineered systems allowing it to thrive where simpler designs failed, its pilots able to execute missions that would have been impossible in older aircraft. And this combination of mechanical superiority and human mastery produced results that were dramatic, measurable, and repeatable, cementing its role as a force multiplier, a linchpin of operational success whose influence could be seen in both immediate tactical victories and the broader strategic shifts it enabled. And yet, the suspense never waned. For every sortie tested new limits, revealed new challenges, and underscored the delicate balance between complex design and human execution. And as pilots became more skilled, engineers more confident, and tactical doctrines more refined, the narrative of the bomber's effectiveness intertwined with the drama of human courage, decision-making, and adaptability, creating a story that was as much about people as it was about machines, a story of symbiosis between obsessive design and disciplined execution, where the aircraft's intricacies amplified the pilot's skill rather than overwhelming it. And in this dynamic, each mission became a high-stakes performance, a controlled experiment in survival, precision, and lethality. And as battle after battle unfolded, from dawn raids over heavily defended harbors to nighttime approaches under the cover of clouds, the aircraft's over-engineering consistently turned potential liabilities into advantages. From redundant hydraulic lines allowing sustained maneuvers under fire to reinforced fuselage sections absorbing damage that would cripple other planes, to the meticulous layout of avionics enabling rapid assessment and response in the heat of combat. And these features not only saved lives, but increased the effectiveness of every strike, contributing directly to the unmatched kill ratio that would define its legacy. And as the sun rose and fell over the vast expanses of the Pacific, painting waves with gold and crimson hues, the bomber continued its relentless operational tempo, a testament to human ingenuity, obsession, and courage. And as pilots recounted harrowing stories of survival, precision, and triumph, the suspense remained ever present, for every sortie carried uncertainty, danger, and the thrill of mastery, reinforcing the legend that would endure, a legend that demanded attention, respect, and awe from friend and foe alike. And as we approach the climax of this point, the anticipation of the next revelations, how the bomber's full potential was further unlocked, how the pilots pushed boundaries, how its over-engineering created a decisive edge, creates an almost tangible tension, a hook that keeps the audience on the edge of their seats, eager to witness the final chapters of a story defined by brilliance, obsession, and the extraordinary synthesis of human skill and mechanical perfection. And as the bomber soared through the skies on yet another mission, cutting through the early morning mist with engines humming like a predatory beast, the culmination of countless hours of design, testing, and obsessive engineering became undeniable. For every control, every system, every bolt had been forged to serve a singular purpose: to dominate the skies, to strike with unerring accuracy, and to survive what no other aircraft could. And as the pilots executed a flawless torpedo run against an enemy formation, weaving between flak bursts and evading the desperate maneuvers of defending fighters, the effectiveness of the over-engineered systems was fully revealed. The redundant hydraulics absorbing shocks, the reinforced fuselage flexing rather than breaking, the finely tuned aerodynamics allowing a level of precision in altitude, speed, and trajectory that turned each release into near certainty. And in that moment, the aircraft was not just a tool, not just a machine, but an extension of the pilot's intent, a symbiosis of human skill and mechanical genius that left enemy captains bewildered and crews awestruck. And as the torpedoes struck with devastating effect, the kill ratio climbing ever higher, it became clear that this aircraft had transcended conventional design philosophy. For what had been dismissed as excessive complexity, as impractical over-engineering, now proved to be the very foundation of unparalleled operational success. And yet, even in triumph, suspense lingered. For the Pacific theater was unpredictable, every mission a high-stakes gamble, every sortie a test of whether this intricate marvel could continue to outperform both expectation and opposition. And the pilots, knowing that their lives depended on mastery of both machine and mind, executed maneuvers with precision, anticipation, and daring. The outcome's a testament not only to the brilliance of the design but to the courage, discipline, and intuition of those who flew it. And as reports returned to Naval Command detailing yet another perfect strike, yet another enemy vessel crippled with surgical efficiency, the legend of the bomber grew. Stories circulating of improbable survivals, incredible accuracy, and the sheer audacity required to harness such a complex system, inspiring awe among allies and fear among adversaries. And as intelligence officers compiled statistics, operational planners adjusted strategies, and historians later chronicled events, it became evident that this aircraft's success was neither fluke nor luck, but the inevitable result of obsessive attention to detail, rigorous testing, and the harmonious integration of human and mechanical capabilities. And as waves of the Pacific reflected the golden light of dawn and dusk, as flak bursts echoed over distant harbors, as fighter engagements raged around the formation, the bomber executed its mission with an almost uncanny effectiveness, reinforcing the narrative that overengineering, far from being a flaw, had become a decisive advantage, a tangible manifestation of visionary design. And as pilots recounted their experiences, describing maneuvers that seemed impossible, precision that bordered on the miraculous, and survivals that defied expectations, the suspense of what the next mission might reveal, what limits could yet be tested, what new feats of engineering and skill could manifest, created a tension that captivated crews, commanders, and future audiences alike. For this was a story of continuous discovery, of human daring interacting with mechanical perfection in ways that reshaped the understanding of aerial warfare. And as the final torpedo found its mark, sinking yet another enemy vessel with devastating efficiency, the narrative drew to a suspenseful close, leaving the audience on edge, anticipating the unfolding impact of this aircraft on subsequent missions, on strategic planning, and on the broader outcome of the Pacific War. And in that moment, one could feel the pulse of history, the echo of engines cutting through the sky, the quiet awe of those who had witnessed or survived its power, and the lingering, cinematic tension of a machine that had achieved what many deemed impossible. A machine whose legacy was defined not by simplicity but by obsessive complexity, not by compromise but by audacious perfection. And as the camera of imagination pans over the battered decks, the triumphant air crews, and the stunned reactions of the enemy, one is left with a final hook, a suspenseful promise that the story of this overengineered torpedo bomber, its unmatched kill ratio, and the daring pilots who wielded it is far from over. For the next chapters will reveal even greater feats, more astonishing engineering, and the enduring truth that in the crucible of war, vision and obsession, when fused with human skill, can produce results that are as extraordinary as they are unforgettable, leaving viewers captivated, inspired, and waiting for the next revelation in this epic saga of ingenuity, courage, and lethal precision.